Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of JKL Media. We're talking Severance once again. This time it's season 2, episode 5, with the interestingly named Trojan's horse instead of just Trojan horse. And we've got our regular crew here. We've got our Jesse in the blue corner. Hello, Jesse.
Hello.
Karen in
Hello.
the red corner.
Hello.
And I'm in the green corner, and this time we've just like on the show, we haven't lost a team member, we've found one, and it's a new outie. How are you doing, Brian?
In this episode, so let's make Brian purple this week.
Oh, so he's our prince.
There you go.
Hi, Brian, how you doing?
Hi, yeah, I'm Ryan. I'm happy to join you guys. I've been a friend of Jesse's for, I think, like at least 15 years, and we've done podcasts together. And I was very happy to see a Severance podcast appear, and was listening to you guys, and kind enough to allow me to be a guest and join the conversation. So I appreciate it.
Fantastic. And you came at an interesting time because we had just had the wow moment in the previous episode, Woes Hollow, and this episode is picking up the pieces. And I'd like to get everybody's quick thoughts about the episode as a whole. And we'll start with you, Jesse, so we can give Brian a chance to see what you guys are going to say.
Yeah, it was interesting. Once again, this is the second week in a row Karen had seen the episode first and sent us an email. And so I was like, oh, wow. And it was a interesting episode. For the first time, I almost felt sorry for Helena. The idea from her perspective, they tried to kill me twice. And I'm like, wow, I guess they have. And there were some really cold moments in this. And I'm a little disappointed in myself that I didn't enjoy Melchek getting called on the carpet more than I want. I actually felt a little sorry for him because I've been at the other end of a performance appraisal where they've just ripped me a new one. But yeah, I thought it was another good episode and continuing. They gave us a couple of answers, but then continuing to string the story along. It's once again just wonderful.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah, I love the title of this episode for one thing. It makes you think as you watch the episode, how does the title work? How does it fit in? Because we know each title has like double, triple meanings when you watch the episode. And I thought this one was really interesting. The opening was not a part of the regular episode. And I didn't even notice that until I was done watching and went to watch it again. And I'm like, oh my God, they never brought this back up again. So there was some weirdness in this episode. And like Jesse said, they hint at some answers. It, it's one of these shows. I love this about this show where they drop in little dribbles and drabbles of information and then they jerk you back into this everything's an unknown quantity thing. And I just, I love this show so much. And I need to let the listeners know when I send emails, I don't give any information away. It's usually like just the subject line is, oh shit, or something like that. And in this one, I just said, the Easter eggs and how Ordbo spells robot if you mix it up. It's an anagram of robot. And I was like, how come we miss that? So there's so many little things that I'm sure we miss. I want to apologize for that, but how could you get everything in these
Mm-hmm.
episodes? But anyway, this one was great. Those are my short thoughts.
Yeah, I can hardly wait to hear your long ones.
Sorry. I'm really
All
sorry.
right, Brian, what's your overall thoughts of this episode?
I remember when that episode, if I could just go back a second to talk about
Sure.
that one. After watching that one, I was like, this is just such a game changer. Like season two of a series in the middle of the season. They could have been done more of the same, where they're introducing a few more quirky things down in the Lumen hallways and whatnot. But this was like such a changing element of new, not only just the environment was different, but the whole Helena imposter element was just I was like, this just put the foot on the gas pedal and just accelerated the narrative of the show incredibly because there's fallout that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So this episode had that task of basically, okay, that happened. Let's now begin to assemble things in a way that is going to not only uh, make it so that there's repercussions and reactions from the characters, but also then setting up things for what we're doing going forward. I watch it as a viewer and also as like, how are the creators doing this and what are they thinking going forward? So I understand a lot of sometimes there's responses on the internet of, oh, this episode wasn't as, but sometimes you have to understand like you have to have building blocks set things up later that you can't always have these big swing episodes one after another because it's just unsustainable. And not that this one was like not a good episode at all. Karen was saying it just had that strange fate of following that other one.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a tough job sometimes for one episode when it follows something that's so out of the realm of what they've done previously in the show. And I think this episode's aptly named on another level in that it seems like a very quiet episode, but you really have to pay attention to what's being said and what's being shown because there's a lot of clues being dropped in this episode. Starting off with, as Karen mentioned, the opening scene, which is a new character that we haven't met before, never really got a good look at his face, and he's pushing a cart. There's always something about pushing carts down hallways that's, I don't know, cinematically interesting. And it's interesting that, as Karen also mentioned, that the song he was whistling was The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And that is a song, for those that are not familiar with the artist, is by Canadian artist Gordon Lightfoot, is based on a true story about a iron ore carrier that sank during one of its runs and lost all the crew members on board. You know, that's a very somber song, and yet the way he was whistling it, he made it almost sound like a joyful little ditty. But we'll have to see what that's all about. And he asked for a tray. At first, I thought they were opening up like a locker for a body or something like that. But then she pulls out, one of the data people pulls out a set of dentist tools. To me, that's what they looked like, anyhow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me too.
And then he takes them down the corridor from Irving's paintings to that elevator. I don't know who's going to be on the receiving end of those tools, but that'll be interesting to find out.
Did you notice that when he went into the elevator
No, I didn't.
and
Oh,
then
okay. Yeah. Yeah. Symbolic. Yep. Very good.
Yeah.
Good catch. No, I didn't see that, but that's been happening every time they
Yep.
show that shot, right? Because even in the
Yep.
new
Yeah.
opening credits, it flips between Helly and Miss Irving, or
Yeah,
Miss
the
Casey.
elevator.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Right.
the
Yeah.
elevator is a big thing.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me as I was watching this is you should know that song if
Hmm.
you're severed.
So that character's
So
not severed.
yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yep.
And loving it, which I have no idea why. It's actually such a dark song, but it is just a captivating story and Gordon's voice and the instrument. And so when he started whistling it, I immediately recognized it and I went, and on my notes, Wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald, WTF, right? And it just and when Irving had talked to her before, he showed the picture and she had said, "Oh, yeah." And she talked about that guy, right? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I thought that was a really interesting. And I kept waiting. Are they going to show his face? Are they going to show his face? And they specifically filmed it so they didn't.
Yep.
And by the way, I just want to one last thing to Brian. I appreciate that this is not a show that I'm trying to second guess right now or figure out just because sometimes, but I love that I love your thought about the storytelling because the casual soprano figure, hey, no one got whacked. It was a boring episode versus and that you don't understand that if it can't all be Spartacus
Yeah.
like where there was sex and nudity and violence and blood every episode.
Sure. And like everyone else, I was very impressed with that open, not just the idea of what is going on, why is this song that, as you mentioned, is got a very tragic tale to it. It's also just unusual in that also it's like a long song, 7 minutes or something. If you listen to the full recorded version and all that stuff, you're like, what does that mean? What is it? Are they going for something that is like an epic? It's something that's long. Is there some sort of, is there, are they by, are they, did they live near a lake? What is the what is it? But I also, again, I really just appreciate so many things of the show. One of the reasons I love it is that visually, like the way they come up with ways to frame a shot and the creativity of like how they masked the person that was pushing that cart and the reflections in the metal shelving and whatnot that made it even more. And it could have just put like in the old Austin Powers gag of blocking things in a funny way with a fruit or whatever to hide a object. They could have just done that, but it was like again, there's reflections and there's like mirroring done. And I'm continually impressed by not just that one particular scene, but like they do that throughout the show. There's like oftentimes when two characters are just talking and they'll be masked in some way by like a cubicle wall that it just happens to be a little a partition in the middle that you can see through. And there's that one little sliver that you can see in such a
Yeah.
way. And for such a stark set for where the Lumen, their offices is, where they are in there, it's amazing they can find so many unique ways to do that. So I just found it really impressive. And like you, I was like, where will this guy show up again? And I don't think he did.
No,
There's one scene later where someone was leaving
I think it was Mark.
one of the characters, and there was a long shot or a medium shot of there was someone like going up some steps, and again, the steps oh, like in a Venetian blind kind of like mass, someone
Hmm.
going down the steps. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Is that the person? The bill was similar, and I don't know. It's one of those things where maybe we'll see them again, maybe we won't. I don't know.
yeah. I would hope we see them again.
Yeah.
That picture,
Yeah, cool.
it's very much an exclamation point over his head.
You got anything to add to the record?
Yeah, not only is it a very long song, it's an epic song. The way he was whistling it was very jaunty, almost like a sea shanty. It's an Irish folk song based on an Irish folk song melody, but it's about people dying and the wreck of a ship, which it's such a dichotomy in the way he was singing it and the actual tone of the song. So is that like a metaphor for what's going to happen to Lumen? It makes you think about stuff because when I was watching it, I was like, what? Okay, I got to identify that tune. And as he whistled it I'm like, oh my God, that's the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And then I thought to myself, Lou's got to like that because Gordon Lightfoot. And I actually dig that song. Because it's based on a true story. And he wrote it before all the details came out. So he's changed it, how he sings it live, but he didn't go back and change the lyrics. And there's a whole story behind it. And I'd like to think that this is going to have a similar bearing on, without saying out loud, hey, look, this is going to be a train wreck. And I did mean train wreck there. Like you watch a train wreck,
Hmm.
you can't stop watching it. So is that going to be what happens over the course of the show? Are they actually going to do something at Lumen? I hope that we actually see some cracks in the hull.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think we'll see something this season. The show's not one to lay something down and then leave it for a long time. Everything that they've put down so far, we've seen the other half of it fairly quickly. So I'm thinking that we will see something this season, but it could be a different case for this particular scene. I guess the other thing about it is I'm just wondering who the actor is that's playing that character. I can't say from the back of him that I recognized who it was. It'll be interesting to find out if we ever do see who the actor is that's playing that. That will be interesting to see. So there you go. We've talked about what, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and we've only done like the first scene. So
The first bit, I'm
strap in,
sorry.
guys. We're going to be into this one for quite a while.
No,
No,
all of
no, no,
us.
no, we're all
This is
there's
yeah.
just so many layers to talk about, and everybody's picking up on different things. It's amazing when you watch videos from other shows and the things that they pick up on. You go, and I going, geez, I never even saw that.
Do you want a
Um,
little spoiler?
I know that something's going to happen with that song.
No, it's not anything big. We already know that he's been cast for this season.
Really?
So definitely going to see him again.
Oh, Robbie Benson. How?
No, it
That's
says he played the doctor on IMDb.
Wow.
I don't even know he was a doctor.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
he had a lab coat on.
Yeah. He didn't have gray hair. We all get older.
He does
Yeah.
now.
That was interesting. All right. That'll be,
Sorry,
wow.
that doesn't.
No, that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
That
normally the way I approach these episodes,
Hold on, Brian wants to say something.
I was going to say my only when I was watching and he had that tray of things uh, that wired
you're breaking up, Brian.
when he had that tray of equipment and he took the elevator. Is I wonder if he is liaison between Severed World and Outie World, perhaps to the doctor that's trying to do the severing.
Ooh, I hadn't thought about that because there has to be someone, a medical person doing it. Boy.
Yeah, because we did see them doing the operation to Heli back
Yep.
in the
Yeah.
first season. So that's interesting. So the way I like to approach these episodes is to go through it character by character instead of chronologically. I just find that is a better approach. The trouble with this show is a lot of the characters have two versions of themselves, but
Yeah.
I think it's still worth approaching it from that perspective. So I'd like to start out with the Audi Mark and just take his arc through the episode. We saw some interesting things this time that we've never seen with him before. There was the pill box, whether those are medications or vitamins or a mix, I'm not sure. And then the really creepy fridge bottles things that looks like I don't know what he was drinking, but I don't want to say what I thought it was.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
that's
Um,
gross.
and then we also learned that Mark is still not reintegrated in this episode. And a thing that was clarified for me that I misunderstood from the final episode of last season is I thought the innies and outies both knew what was happening during that time period, but it's only the innies knew what was happening during that time period. So that's been clarified for me. Other people probably already realized that, and maybe you guys did too, but I just wanted to point that out. And then at the end of the episode, he comes back and Asal Ragabi is living in his basement. Uh, we find her going through his wife's things, and there's also a box that we assume's her ashes, and which is interesting. And they're going to wait one more day before trying more reintegration. And the other thing that I noticed during this episode is Mark was occasionally coughing. That's the parts of the episode I'd like to cover off in this convo, Jesse. So why don't you give me your thoughts on anything that struck you during those Audi Mark scenes?
Yeah, the first time I heard him cough, I just thought, oh, he's getting a cold. And then when it happened a couple other times, I thought of Chekhov's cough and
Yep.
Petey being sick, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And Petey being sick. One of the things that I love about this series is that Outie Mark is a mess. He is still, and I think part of that is by dividing it, there is no processing with any Mark about the grief and moving on. And so I think that has hurt him emotionally. So I thought definitely when I started hearing cough again, are they trying to sign that he could be sick the way that Petey was? And I had speculated last week that maybe just because Audi Mark would know what any Mark's doing, any Mark wouldn't know what's Audi Mark doing if they were integrated. But I just think they're still going through it slow. Audi Mark is going through all these different things, and
Oh,
I assume that's some kind of serum that she's developed to help with the medicine of integration. But it since this is all on the fly and she's knowing, he does not look happy drinking it, going it. And then it it does look like the world's worst roommate. Like he's not happy to have her there at all. And so I think he's a mess. And I'm actually a little worried about Audi Mark.
you
Hmm.
haven't been before?
I am, but I'm even more now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Audi Mark, I'm sorry. Audi Mark is a real mess. I agree with you. It looked like maybe when he first, like he's in front of his pills and his hair's all done and he's got like a suit and a tie or a shirt and a tie on. And he looks more put together, but then he's taking these pills. I feel like where outwardly he, and the show did this on purpose, showed us him right before he leaves for work instead of when he's coming home. Because when he's coming home, he gets all disheveled and all that stuff. So they showed us this more put together Mark, and he doesn't want anyone living with him. And I feel like maybe he blames her for Petey because she was the one that tried to deintegrate him. And we know that Ragabi was a Lumen employee. I don't think she was a severed Lumen employee, but I think she was cut off from everything else. She understands what goes into the severing process, but I don't think she understands what's going on. I think that's a lot of her motivation. She saw some things that she didn't like, and so she wants very much to get those answers, and she's going to use, and poor Mark just gets used in every episode. Last week he was used by Helena. This week he's being used by Ragabi and Helly a little bit, I think. Poor guy. He's like a sad sack to me. And then so different from his any in this episode. I'll put it that way. We'll talk about any Mark in a second. But wow, Audi Mark is, it looks like he is getting more put together, but I do think he is falling apart a little bit more. And then at the end of the episode, we see him with flashes of his any Mark's experiences, I guess. It's mostly the hallway and seeing his wife. And here I thought for sure that it was Ragavi talking to him and gaslighting him until I realized those little whispers he was hearing was his wife, Miss Casey, talking to him. So just an interesting episode for Audi Mark.
Yep. Brian.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what you guys are saying there. Jesse, I had the same thought with the bottles or whatever he's taking, that it was something to do with maybe helping with integration. The thing I love about the show is they don't tell you outwardly or explicitly these things. They let you absorb them, and if they will be important, they trust, and we trust them that they will make it clear to us later. And I really appreciate that, because so many shows are just don't take the intelligence of the audience seriously. And this one, like other shows like Andor, for example, was another a really smart show for a different franchise entirely. That you can watch it and feel reasonably confident that the writers know what they're doing. They're not just putting things there that won't be explained in some way or have some kind of payoff. I think with Mark and Minnie and Audi, the interesting part to me is you mentioned earlier about they wouldn't know what a pop song is because of their inner. I, and that's the thing I wonder a lot about the indie. Like, how much do they know? They said they don't really know what the sky looks like, and so that's why the whole excursion was such a big thing for them. And so there's it seems like they're very compartmentalized in that way. And so for this episode, his reaction and almost sort of rejection of Helly, like emotionally, he's an adult and he has intelligence and he knows how to deal with people and he can read and write and all those things. But that goes back to that core question, like when they're severed, like what do they have access to? Not just intelligence wise, but emotionally. And are they just learning to interact with people, things that children go through as they develop? And so that was just interesting for me to see him respond in that way, and whether it was like something that like the true core of Mark, like unified Mark would do, or is it just something that the any Mark would is just learning to deal with? Because I've just been betrayed, I've been completely gaslit, and just had this horrible experience. And is that just an entirely different way that Audi Mark would have reacted? Or so it's, I'm sure like someone that studies psychology would just have a field day. Just it's one of the things that I find just to be so amazing about the show is that there's shows start and they can have a very simple core premise, like Lost, the people are on an island and they need to survive, and then something weird is happening, and then narratively it branches into a like dozens, if not hundreds of things. And like, this show has that as well. You have a very simple core conceit where you have workers who were severed and they have their own, but there's this little mystery of what is Lim doing. And as we keep going on, we're like, okay, there's more things narratively that are going on. But the thing that I find really pulls me into this show is that besides the narrative expansion, there's the character dynamic expansion. Because we have, if you think about it, how many characters are on the show? There's the actors, there's four core actors of like the main group, but actually there's those four characters, those actors are actually playing eight. So there's eight characters right there. And just think about that. Like in a show, popular show, have just off the bat, eight main characters is something that's a heavy lift for a lot of people to watch. And they do it so well. And then you add in like other characters, like the outie world sisters and spouses, and then you get the innie world, and you're looking at easily, if not 16 recurring characters. But now we're starting to get like this kind of like reverberation of and back and forth ping pong. Outie recognizes that the innie has this relationship with the person. The innie now understands that the outie has this out. And it's like the tapestry of it is just like getting bigger and bigger, and I just love it.
Yeah, yeah. I think my favorite series that I've ever read is the Dresden Files, and it has very much the same approach. It starts very small with a magician who happens to be a detective, and they just keeps every book keeps stacking on all this mythology from across all the various mythologies, and by the time you get to the 20th book, it's just like this whole universe of characters. So it's really well done. And Severance is doing kind of the same thing, but doing it in a unique way in that it's doubling up on characters, which is something that hasn't seen I haven't seen on such a large scale before. So the thing that's concerning for me this season, and I mentioned how pissed off I was at Mark last episode because he was basically, and I don't know when I said that if younger viewers probably have no idea what I'm talking about. If you've ever watched Bambi, you'll figure out pretty quickly what I'm talking about there. And this episode, he's like had the rug pulled out from under his feet, finding out about Helena instead of Helly being out with them for the outing and everything, and of course what happened with them. So he's really lost at sea, and then he's undergoing this reintegration, which is not an easy experience for him. His journey is very internalized, which is always a hard thing to show dramatically in a TV show. But they are able to do it with the other characters in the innie and outie world, showing their differing views on what they think Mark is feeling. It's a delicate balancing act, and the show, as you pointed out, Brian, they're being very careful not to spell out exactly where the dividing line is between innie and outie and what they're sharing, and that's where we as viewers are living in, and that's what makes the show so interesting. When he has that transference episode and he's hearing Miss Casey saying all these sayings to him in the corridor, the one that really stood out to me, he says, "You like ice cream, two scoops, but both have to be the same flavor." And I thought, oh, okay. And then right now he's not the same, though. I don't think his two scoops are the same flavor, and that's why he's having so many problems. But yeah, that was pretty cool. Innie Mark, I want to save the Innie Mark and Helly conversation as a separate one. So let's just talk about Innie Mark's main points that I've got here. It's being driven in home time and again that he's finished his objective of finishing Cold Harbor, which is what he's data mining, is very important to Lumen. Still don't know what Cold Harbor is. We know in this episode that he's by the end he's at 85%. So they're setting a clock there that something big is going to happen. He has another transference flash, and then just as he's leaving in the elevator, Milchek stops it and chastises him for leaving 6 minutes early. And Mark is pretty unimpressed with or nonplussed by Milchek's behavior and calls him out and says, "When am I going to see then another edition of the bullshit Gazette?" Which I thought was great. And then I love the way they compose shots, the two of them facing off, and then Milchek takes that step that gets right in Mark's face. So visually, you understand that he's trying to exert power over him. And he says to him, "Did you tell Helly about what happened with you and Elena?" In pretty blunt terms as well. And then, of course, Mark coughs again. There's that whatever that is about, if that's an after effect of as I think you were trying to say, Jesse, about the transference or not. We'll have to see. I think that's all the notes I had on any mark. Jesse, is there anything you want to comment on those items?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting when we talk about their conversations. He's feeling betrayed
Mm.
and not sure where to go. And I love that scene in the elevator. And as you talked about, Brian, right? The shot where they're the side profiles, and Milchek is definitely in his space. And there's so much dynamics here because Milchek just got his ass handed to him during the appraisal. And so he's ready to vent some anger, and Mark's frustrated. And so there's this back and forth that's just really interesting. And then the Mark is almost like any Mark is in this trance almost like he's shell shocked. Yeah, we can have a funeral if it doesn't take too long. I just want to keep working. I can't wait till we get to the whole funeral and the fruit bust. I really feel sorry for Mark. He was starting to have some happiness, and now it's just been all ripped away from him.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, I know this is going to be dumb, but when I was in high school, I took 2 years of psychology because I thought I might actually go into that field. And we were supposed to do some kind of, for lack of a better word, a character study. And so I decided to do elevator politics. And I would get into an elevator in different ways to see how people reacted. When it came time for me to get in and face the occupants of the elevator, the jostling was intense. There was a lot of people moving around, getting uncomfortable, shifting. Instead of facing the doorway, which was where I was facing them, they would turn to the side and make sure I wasn't like facing them. One of the things that I noted about that scene was that when Milchik literally steps in his face, Mark is unflinching and he is not disconcerted with this conversation at all. I feel like his treatment of Milchek is a byproduct of maybe his reintegration, like a little bit rubbing off on him. He's becoming much more disillusioned, and he's not afraid of him anymore. And I think that was the most impactful part of that scene for me, was seeing how not only he talked back to Milchek, Corbell, and when Miss Corbell was around, he was very subservient to her, but Milchek, not so much. And I think that has a lot to do with the things that have happened to him outside, where he's getting that feeling and he's carrying it with him. But I do think that they're intimating that perhaps Mark is, they're saying it with his Cold Harbor contributions, but I do also think that he's more intuitive than the rest of the severed employees, where they are happy for the most part to be severed and to not have to worry about the outside world. He is much more inquisitive. He pushes back, and after, especially after Petey, obviously, and I feel like that's rippling out. And Dylan is becoming more interested in it. We know Irving he was a company man for most of his tenure until he was shown outside, and he became a whole different person. And I just love that. And Helly's got a different set of issues with her, but man, that scene with Mark and Milchek in the elevator was, I thought, particularly telling.
Very good. Brian.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. He seems like he, from the beginning, has been not as following or buying into the program as Irving was. But I think just with all that's gone on with him, and especially the most recent events, I think this is it used to be the break room or whatever the means of punishing the employees was like the big deterrent. And now I think they're coming to see because there is this outside influence that can shape and even intrude on their existence here, that what does it matter? I think it is interesting that they have set up the Cold Harbor is like the MacGuffin that they're building towards in some way. Liked and found curious about this episode was that you actually do see him like go in his computer to file that particular folder project that is now named very explicitly Cold Harbor. And so you realize it's not just some code word for the Audi world or some larger initiative, but it's just this literally just like a folder on his little desktop as it is. And it makes me has so many questions. Again, it's okay, did they just have one project after another they have to finish? Is like Cold Harbor really this big thing that they have to do? Or is it just like the next series of things that they're trying to do for a larger purpose of something else? And once he's done with Cold Harbor, he's disposable, and the next person comes along and does the next folder object on that screen that has some importance. So I'm really curious to see where that is going to lead in. Lou mentioned they set that timer. He's at 86%, unless there's like some way to like backtrack
Hmm.
his progress. They're going to be hitting Cold Harbor 100% at some. I'm presuming this season is going to be like that's what they're building towards, and we're going to find out like what is the purpose of it. Is it what does it even mean? So that to me was like one of the little nuggets that was in this episode that again so subtle but could have big repercussions later.
Yeah, it's tough to say where all this stuff is going to come to a head.
You guys, something real quick.
Sure.
Have you all read Ender's Game?
Yep.
Yes.
So this kind of reminds me of that he's doing something, and I think whatever he's doing is doing something that he wouldn't want to happen in a bigger sense, right?
Oh,
The
definitely.
numbers,
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Again, Mark
Hmm.
gets used by everyone.
Yes, he's being
Yeah.
used by everyone. That's the bottom line for sure. Uh, so I really want to get to the Innie Mark Helly scenes, but before we can do that, we have to talk about Audi Helena. Um, and her moments in the episode are also, like Jesse was alluding to earlier, is trying to make us feel some empathy for her because she doesn't seem to be in a very good spot either. There's the comment that Drummond throws off about her tempers need time to rebalance. So that leads me to assume that she's been undergoing some sort of mind regimentation ever since she was born. And whether this is something that all the Egans go through, I don't know, but that wouldn't be too far off if that was true. They're not going to inform her father what happened at Ortbo. She does not want to go back into the office, as she calls the innies animals. And she wants confirmation that her father approves of the plan of her going back in as an innie, and they say yes, he has approved of it. Natalie points out there's a risk, but they still believe it's worth it. And then for the first time, at least this season, we get to see Helena and Helly transfer in the elevator shot. So that's a big moment too. And then it was funny to realize that this was Helly's first meeting with Miss Wong. So that was, and she also learns during the course of the episode, because Dylan, who is really ticked off about what's happened to Irving, that she's an Egan, and she wants to know why Irving was trying to kill her. And again, as Brian pointed out, there's this uncertainty about where the outies and innies, how they interact with one another, what's the barrier between the two. So a lot of interesting things there in that stuff, Jesse. Why don't you talk about those story beats?
Yeah, I did love because you have to remember that Helly was on stage screaming, and then she woke up being drowned, right?
Mhm.
And then she goes back, and now she's back in the elevator, right? And None of this, she doesn't know anything about any of this. What's hilarious to me is Helena, very reserved, very methodical, and Helly is all out there, right? And just full of emotions. So I think that was, she's all gung ho about, okay, we need to do this. I was a little disappointed. I realize it's just for me, but I wanted to hear her tell the other three, I woke up and I'm an Egan. My
Yeah.
Audi is an Egan.
She doesn't
And
know that until Dylan said something.
no, she would because she
This
saw when she was
Oh,
at
yes, that's right. Yes.
yeah, she saw the video
Yes, she
of
has
her talking
access.
about it and she
Yeah,
saw that.
Helly doesn't know that she's an Egan.
No, Helly was, remember when they did the overtime contingency? Helly saw that she was at that festival and everyone was talking to
All
her
right,
and
okay.
she
Did
saw
she
the
know that?
pictures.
Yeah, everyone was talking to her.
Yeah, and she
Yeah.
saw all the
Hard to
like
keep
in
it straight.
it
Yeah.
is very hard. And the
Yeah,
videos I assume give her name. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
yeah, it once again there's complexities. Yeah, like she doesn't know about the goat people.
Nope.
She doesn't know about these
I
whole
thought about that
feral
too.
group.
She doesn't know about the
And
tent.
yeah, should know about the tent
Yeah.
and everything. And there was that I was a mic drop moment when he says, "Have you told her that
After.
had intimate if you effed her?" There was so much anger about that point.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah. I I do feel bad for Helly because she's a sympathetic character to us, and the show has told that to us over the course of these 1.5 seasons that we're supposed to like Helly. But it's showing us more and more that maybe we should like Helly, but only because she is not Helena. And we should not like Helena. And yes, I felt bad for her, but ultimately, she doesn't think that they're people, the Innies. She still even, and I think that's her real sentiment. I think that she was curious about Mark because of the video she watched, Helena, the video she
Yeah.
watched. And so that's what happened in the tent, that she was curious about it. She wanted to know what that felt like. So again, Mark being used.
Well, and to interrupt, sorry, but I
No,
was
that's
thinking
okay.
of the Simon and Garfunkel lyrics, "The Boxer," right?
Mm,
The whores on Fifth Avenue, and I did find some went there for comfort, right? So I think also she could have been going for comfort,
right,
right? Because
exactly.
we talked about last time, it is a very cold family.
She doesn't know love or
Yeah,
closeness or friendship or any of that.
yeah. And in slightly ways, and I'll have to send this to you, Brian. I sent it to, there was a article that went through the family tree, and this is in a lot of way a royal family, right?
Yep.
Like there, this is the firm. Queen Elizabeth used to talk about this is the firm, and the you grew up in the business. Yeah. And and to go your other point is when they're planning the funeral, she says to Milchek, the oh the young girl, that
Miss Huang.
yeah, Miss
Wong.
Wang, you're gonna
Oh,
make them
Huang,
think they're
sorry.
people.
Right,
Yep.
They're gonna think
right.
they're people. And
Yep.
so this is not just Helena thinks that. This is everyone thinks innies are just tools.
Yep.
Yep.
Are they dental tools? Yeah,
Perhaps.
so I thought that was funny when she got off the elevator and said, "Who are you?"
Yep.
And I I feel like she's picking up right where they left off, where she had kissed Mark and then gotten on the elevator, and she wants to pick that back up. And this is a Mark she doesn't know, and she doesn't understand why. Is she going to find that out? Dylan blew up at her and said a little bit. She's grappling with that she is coming to terms with maybe she's not a good person on the outside. And the fact that Mark won't trust her now and she wants to pick back up with them getting closer and all that stuff. I do feel bad for Helly. Helly, I think, is someone we should feel bad for. Helena, not so much. Again, it's one of those things where you're like, okay, we've also been told in this episode that Mark and Ragabi are pretty sure that his wife is still alive because Lumen has contacts in the morgues and all that. So now we have this, it's gonna be a triangle because if she's still alive and Helly is still a thing, instead of Helena being unsevered, then what is going to happen there? Is Helly going to disappear? Is Gemma not going to be found? There's so many implications to this whole thing. And I felt horrible for Helly in this episode. I really did. She's still upset by Irving not being there anymore. And that just shows how Helly is taking on all of the characteristics that Helena does not have. She has empathy. She cares about people. She's not cold at all. And I feel like when she became severed, it's like all of those personalities that Helena couldn't show just came out. And it's weird to see that she is Helena's direct opposite. And it was frustrating in this episode.
Brian.
Yeah, I find Helena to be one of the most nuanced characters that are on
Mhm.
the show. And it reminds me in a way of going back to like Battlestar Galactica with Caprica 6 and all the like the quote Caprica models who had all these different personalities. And I was always just so impressed by Trisha Helfer, the actress who could portray all these different aspects of what was, the same base model, but had all these different personalities.
Mhm.
With Helena, I don't know how to feel about her because oh, she is just a bitch. And then there's that brief turn where we're like, okay, maybe I'm sympathetic because maybe she's just trapped by her family and has to do certain things. And that moment in the tent where she says, I don't like who I am on the other side of me, whatever. And again, that could have been that she was truthful that she didn't like the Helly part of her, or that she was acting as Helly and really truly doesn't like herself as the outie because she has to do XYZ in terms of fulfilling the family name and doing horrible things. But then we go back and you could see, yeah, she would be pissed off if they tried to kill her twice, and so maybe she is malevolent, and I just don't know. But all those things can be true at the same time. She could
Mhm.
maybe not wanting to be an Egan and have to deal with that legacy. And she could also hate these people who are treating her badly because she's not this pristine, perfect Ellie character. So again, where they go with that, I'm very curious. And I think again, the writers and all the actors are doing just so great, like having these
Mhm.
characters that are very different but believable at the same time.
Yeah, for me, the Heli Helena the dichotomy reminds me most, and I always date myself when I make these references. It reminds me of the original Star Trek episode where Kirk is split into two parts, like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde episode. I think Helena is the most closest to that sort of model in terms of her two different personalities. Whereas with the other characters, I think they're more or less just different shades of the overall same personality. I think with Helly and Helena, Helly is the inner person that would have been if she had been not born an Egan and had been groomed to take over the company whenever her father decides to step down. So where they're going to go with her, I don't know. And I've got mixed feelings about her too, but she's definitely got a bit of the Helena in her because at the end she tells Mark to stop being such an asshole. So I thought that sounds like Helena. That doesn't sound like Helly. So is that her or is that the other one? Like out of all the characters, her character has really advanced from the first season and become probably the most complex character. I think she's the most complex character on the show right now. And it's going to be very interesting to see where she goes.
I want to know more.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to what ends up to, for me was the most engrossing scenes in the episode were between Innie, Mark, and Helly. Um, the Mark he's feeling so betrayed right now. Every time he's made himself vulnerable, it's come back to bite him with believing he lost his wife, having this relationship with who he thought it was Helly, but it turns out to be Helena. So that's a big shock to him as well. With Irving, you can see that he's not buying into this whole any world anymore. He just wants a quick funeral, wants to get it over with. The argument that the two of them have is pretty poignant. I think that Helly is trying to tell Mark that she can't be held responsible for what Helena did, but how can Mark reconcile that? Because for him, he couldn't tell the difference. And that's the other thing that's really bothering him, that he couldn't tell the difference. And Helly says that you have to trust me. And he says that this is real. And he says, how can I do that? And that's what we're trying to figure out too. How can we figure out who's who at any given moment? Jesse, well, talk about that scene or those scenes between Innie, Mark, and Helly.
Yeah, I love his frustration of they know everything because you told them, not me.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it is Brian talked about, right? They're each of these characters are two different characters. And for the first time, any Mark interacted with Audi Helena, and but he thought it was Helly. And talk about a betrayal. I love his anger. I love his frustration. And also he slept with someone he didn't mean to sleep with, right? And so that's got to be disturbing to him. So I loved everything about that interaction and his coldness. I understood, all right? It and and there's so many secrets now going on with this whole group. Dylan knowing that he has his outside family, right? Milchek throwing that in his face. All this going on. We're weaving these messages over and over again that I just love watching it. But yeah, that was some of my favorite scenes is him just showing his frustration. And it's for those of us who are in relationships, right? Sometimes your spouse, they hear your anger because you're frustrated at something else and they end up taking the brunt of it, even though it's not fair to them, but you can't stop it. And in this case, he can't. You're the face of my betrayal. And I realize that's you were betrayed too, but I can't get past that.
hmm Yep. Karen.
Yeah.
My thoughts on this is that he did not give consent to sleep with Helena.
Yeah.
And that's a heavy thing. He sees his, for lack of a better word, rapist when he looks at Helly. There's going to be trauma there. And uh, it makes me feel terrible for Mark because now Helly doesn't know this, but he does. And all he can see is how he's been used by her when he looks at her face. And it's tragic. It really is because we know what Helly is. She's not that person, and it's so complicated.
Ryan.
Yeah, I will say, like Karen just brought up, they don't know what some of the other characters know. They have a family life, or they slept with those mistakenly, not mistakenly, but all these things that they're holding internally. And one of the pet peeves that I have, or any viewer or reader has with stories, is like the characters that things could always be solved if they just spoke up and said, "This is happening."
Yes.
And I totally trust the writers and the creators of the show. And so obviously right now there's this tension of, oh, he knows this, but she doesn't, and Bill knows this, and he's not telling them. That can only go so far. There needs to be at some point some sort of expository scene where people relay and admit or get these things out, and that can be cathartic. And I think that'll be a positive. If it goes on too long, it becomes a contrivance where it's okay. The story basically is happening because people aren't being upfront. And I don't, again, I have faith that won't be going on for a season or however long, and because that I just don't see that happening based on the track record of the show. It is something is in my mind now because it we've seen it at least for one episode, and I just my hope is that it doesn't go on too long.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The major beef I have with the show right now is why aren't the innies trying to contact the other outies once they're out of the office? That doesn't seem to be, that's not making any sense to me right now. But we'll have to see. At some point, I expect that to happen as well. Okay, we've got Milchek and Dylan to deal with. Let's work with Milchek. He is a sympathetic character to me, and he's going through a lot of pressure right now, for sure. He's taking some big swings, and some of the results have been less than spectacular, to say the least. He's probably had the most cringy performance review I've ever seen. When he said it could take more than 4 hours, and he says, "I hope it doesn't come to that." Jesse, why don't you talk about him? And he tried to allay some of the concerns about what Helena was doing there by that story about the king pretending to be a peasant to find out what the people are really thinking. I thought that was lame. But talk about Milchek in this episode.
So, a couple things. We are going to go through your review. If this takes longer, we will provide lunch. And he makes the joke, oh, not like, yeah, and here's the lunch menu. So it's telling you right then and there, this is going to be bad. A jerk move when they're all in his office and he sits down and leaves them all standing. I guess maybe because there isn't chairs or he didn't ask them to sit down. And he uses two big words. And my favorite was the paperclip
Mm,
because for all of us who's worked in a corporate world, we may not get called on about our paper clips, but there has always been something that you go, why does this matter? I had a boss tell me once when I got promoted to manager for the first time that I needed to quit wearing funny ties. I had Looney Tune tie, and I had a Superman tie, and I had a Elizabeth Taylor cat on a hot tin roof. He said, "Now it's your manager. You can't do that." And I was like, "Why? Why does it matter?" But he was my boss, so I quit wearing funny ties. And so the whole paper clips and him seeing that, I do think I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts of in the idea, right? As an African American, he's Lumen is a very white, pardon the pun, corporation. And he tried to reach out to, he really wanted to, hey, before we go in there, how did you feel when you got the the photos, the paintings?
mm.
And when she's just cutting him off, if he wasn't such a jerk, I would have felt a little sorry for him. But he's just in a real weird place. And how cool is it that Mr. Drummond has taken on this bigger role? And I had asked, who is he? What is he? And it appears he is somebody. He's pretty important because he can even push Helena to do things. So yeah, I just everything about that was awkward.
Yep. Yep. Karen.
Yeah, I saw on social media, it was a Reddit post where someone already had taken that idea of the folder with all the information in it and had made the same design for her friend's birthday instead of a performance review. And she put her name at the bottom and then birthday. Like there's an Office episode where they're celebrating Kelly's birthday, and Dwight puts a banner up and it says, "It is your birthday, period." And so it looked that birthday period on the cover, and then some adjectives over on the right. And I thought that was really funny because we've all worked in offices, like Jesse said, and I was told not to wear a skirt or not to wear pants once, of course, by a male superior. I'm sorry, guys, but that's what happened. And it's just the minutia that they put in things. They were confused as to where to start because of the paperclip. Were they really, or was it just a way to something they picked out in order to have something mundane in his report? And then I feel like there's a slight escalation when they talk about him using big words. I love that when he mentions that, Milchick comes back at him with a big worded sentence,
Yes.
which I thought was funny. And then the whole sliding the menu over to him, and boy, that guy is effective. That big guy. Sorry, I don't. Yeah, Mr.
Yeah.
Drummond. Thank you. I like that character as far as the fact that he's super interesting. I don't like him as a person, obviously, but it, wow, that was like shades of taking a real performance review up a notch. It had the same feeling as like a real performance review. I was also told once I was my own, I had several jobs where I was my own department. In this job, I had to redo images and fonts for people, and I was the only person that did that. It was a company that created designs for credit cards. And I was the one that I created custom fonts. And I was the only person in the office that did anything like this. I was connected to the programming department, but they didn't do the same thing. And so, in order to declassify me, they put me in a group with all the admin. And that meant like the front desk person and the secretaries and the office manager. And when I went to a meeting, I felt out of place. That one of the women, this is a notable one, complained about how people were leaving their pages on the copier. And I thought to myself, why does this matter? It doesn't matter. We're doing something else here. Take those pages and put them in the box that's next to the printer if you're that upset by it. And then they came to me and I was like, I have no idea what to say here in my head. And they would come to me and say, hey, you have some downtime. Why don't you make posters for the other room? And okay, I guess I can, but really my downtime is waiting for them to come and being ready for them to hand me stuff. So yeah, it really reminded me of that environment that I was in. And I felt horrible for him. It's like they're making him more human this season. And I really want to see where that goes with Milchick. And that hallway conversation he had, I thought was tragic as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Natalie, we could see that he was uncomfortable by it when he was given the images and then the posters, whatever. And then him trying to identify with her and get like a common ground. He feels alone. He feels like he's out on his own ledge and making up stuff as he goes along, and that he had this kind of commonality with her, and him being totally shot down, I thought was very sad. Making sure we understand this is an office environment, but it's so different. It is very dystopian feeling.
Brian.
Yeah, I echo that a lot. There's so much in such a short little time with the Milchek scenes. And the thing that really struck me about his conversation with Natalie was that they brought that level of racial awareness into the show. Because easily they could say this world that Lumen exists in obviously is not ours. It's a very strange optic of it. It's similar, but it's not the same. Like the technology is different. The way that a lot of things happen is just strange. but it is America because they reference lots of things in America and states and cities. And so you could easily just be like, this is a, no pun intended, whitewashed version of some dystopian-ish weird location. But no, they said they brought in that aspect to it. And I'm glad they did because it was obviously when he did open that portfolio and saw those images.
Yes,
Hmm.
exactly.
And I'm glad they addressed it because I didn't even know. So that was an interesting scene, and I'm glad that they did go there. I don't know where they're going to go from there, but
Hmm.
it's an acknowledgement. I'm just glad that they did acknowledge it. And then as far as the performance review, like some of the quirkiness of it, this show is funny. It does have very satirical bits. It has things that you recognize as jabs at corporate life and
Hmm.
working in a company, the mundane bullshit that you have to abide by, or and some of the rules and things like that. And so, like the first two items on his performance review, which were just so trivial and which maybe in another quarter would have been his only strikes against him.
Yeah.
But then you go from DEFCON 1 level of performance review to, okay, now we're going to get to DEFCON 5 of, wow, you, and then Jesse, you mentioned, or maybe it was Lou, that Drummond has this role and like where did he, what position does he have? And this is where I sometimes wonder like how things are behind the scenes in terms of like production, because I think in another, and I don't know what it is. Patricia Arquette might not be available this full season. Maybe, it took him 3 years to get this on the air after the first one because of all the different obstacles they had with COVID, with writer strike, XYZ. And so some actors, they could have other jobs. And so maybe Patricia Arquette was not as available this season. And they're like, we need to just have someone be like in that Cobell role of the person that's, telling Milchek, you screwed up, do this, do that. And she's been notably absent. Or it could be truly that she is available and they just have other ideas for her character right now that because she is like in the back. We've forgotten about her. Where is she? What's she doing? I don't think she's gone. She's going to come back in some way, I'm sure. We won't know until later. And one last thing I will say about this Milchek is that I would love to see him. I'd love to see his innie. Like all of a sudden, as some sort of rebellion, like they have Milchek become severed and he's appears on the floor like, where am I? What am I doing? And they're like, okay, buddy. I just love to see him as an innie because a lot of these characters, they have these dual roles. And
Hmm.
and some of the unsevered people, they do to a degree because they have to pretend at times. Like Cobell had to pretend that she was like this, person on the outside versus the inside. It would be very different to see an actually severed version.
Yeah, it's interesting about Miss Cobell because, like you, I don't know the behind the scenes production scheduling issues they face, but I have to think that she's still going to be a prominent part of the season because they keep showing her in the intro sequence with that, and then she's got like her face is like a big searchlight. So I'm sure she's got some role to play later in this season or maybe next season, who knows? But the trailer or the intro clip has been pretty good at the, if you look back on it after you've seen the season, a lot of those shots are from individual episodes in the series. She's got something, I still think she's got some part to play in the season, but we'll have to see. And we have to remember that she left under strange circumstances as well. So we've got the funeral scene, and I'll throw in Dylan into that because, again, he's turning out to be, obviously, to me, to be a supporting character. He's a lot of times he's just there for exposition, though he does have his own storyline. It's not as prominent as the other ones. His idea of having a funeral was interesting. His eulogy was pretty good. I love the dick and contradiction. I thought that was pretty funny. And he feels guilty about not believing in Irving. And then he flashes back to the hang in there that Irving said in the previous episode. And he finds that message that's got the map and the directions and that corridor drawing in there. Anything you wanted to say about Dylan, Jesse?
Yeah, I thought it they're both right. Irving is dead, but he's not dead. But their Irving is dead. We need a funeral.
Yeah.
And they talked about, I guess this has happened where people have died on the severance floor. right?
Mhm.
That was a line. I went, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I guess you think about it. I mean, there are people who have, I've never worked where someone has passed away at the job, but I have worked with people who have died while I still knew them. They were still working at the same company.
Right.
So I thought that was just a little odd. And I like how his life was in quarters. Like his birth date and his death date were in the quarters. Almost go back to star date in the original Star Trek. And Lumen, it's all the quarters, right? And they talked about last year, hey, we finished the quarter. We had a strong quarter. This is going to be the best quarter ever. So it it also you wonder, do they actually not think it's odd to have a fruit bowl that looks like the dead person's face? I mean, right? Like that just there is one thing about this show is this they keep doing things that are WTF, right? Great comedy is when everything is going around you crazy and you act like it's absolutely normal. That was really interesting. Yeah, Dylan over the past two episodes has not had a lot of time, but he did have we did get to see his outie wife and some time with his outie person. So I think they'll take turns. I don't know if we'll end up having time, but I did just want to throw a mention to Mark's sister and her husband
Yeah.
and him. This could make us millions whether I agree with this crap or not,
Hmm.
right? He's being seduced by the idea and he's lying to himself. You know, if I write this, I could help change things from the inside. And how often is that happened, right? I'm going to join the blank administration, fill in whoever you want, and I'm going to change from the inside,
Yeah.
right? So I just want to make sure that we at least, if anyone had something to say about that, they get a comment. So
Hmm.
turn it over to you.
Karen.
Yeah, Dylan is great in this episode. I love how loyal he is to Irving. I love that he apologizes to Irving. Yeah, the fruit head is weird. I agree. Very weird. The way it's carved, the way his nose is a different color than the rest of it. That you notice when they cut into the side as to not disturb the face of Irving. Him realizing that hang in there meant something was also really good. Those motivational posters creep me out a lot. They say something at the bottom. What do they say? I'm sorry. It says like this motivational sentiment is brought to you by Lumen, and then you're welcome, or some enjoy,
Yeah.
something like that. And that one that kind of looks like the Obama poster, Baird, Grin and bared it, just, and that's their renovated break room. I guess they're building them up instead of breaking them in that room now. And the banner was weird. Mrs. Huang or Miss Huang not being able to play her song that she practiced. I thought that was funny. You can tell, right?
Yeah, we don't have time for the Thurman. And she's, oh, it's my song.
Yeah, I practiced. He's definitely punishing her for that.
Yes.
Uh, Patricia Arquette will be back. They've confirmed that. I thought it was Bert. It's not Bert.
Boy, that was a nice little scene too, wasn't it?
I love that we're getting more of cowbell.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should not say cowbell, but Bert is so good in this. He's inviting Irving to his house so they can hash things out. His husband is the great John Noble, which we'll see coming.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think what else was there with it. Not much. Just so much minutia in this episode, and so many things that I think people might not get. I saw a post also with someone saying when you're less intelligent than someone else that's watching Severance, and they're talking about what does the MDR do, and then in her mind does Dr. Milchek give off bi energy? So I thought it was funny that she's showing that there's actually like levels of people that watch this show, the people that dissect it, the people that just watch it on the surface, and how everyone can enjoy it. And I felt like this is one of those episodes that might be difficult for the surface person to enjoy, but I think there are definitely things that will impact them moving forward, that they'll get moving forward.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I think as we mentioned, and maybe it's not fair, but Dylan is perceived as a quote side character, or obviously he's a main character because he's one of the main. That said, we do acknowledge that Mark and Helly kind of are at the core of like where the show has in its like narrative and its mysteries and things. But I think Dylan is great. Last episode, he didn't have as much to do other than a few typically Dylan comments about, oh, that's weird. I really love that they gave him in this episode the funeral speech because it was really well done. And not just in terms of the Dylan character felt about losing his friend, but as the actor to be able to do it that way, I thought it was just really phenomenal. So hats off to him. The one thing I'll say is that it goes back to my earlier comment about keeping things internal and not sharing is now Dylan has two things. He's got the thing about not telling about having seen or interacted with or having knowledge of his exterior family, and now this note with the directions on the poster. And so again, hopefully some of this will come to light, and that's just my hope. I don't want to revisit the topic again. uh, Bad writers are ones that don't allow characters to to do the smart thing because it allows the story to just keep along.
Right.
Writers take advantage of it and allow things to then create new opportunity. So much opportunity in all these characters divulging and admitting or revealing certain secrets because the show is not afraid to do things and press the gas pedal down. Like that last episode was an example, and that opening just so many doors of things that can happen. So that's
Mhm.
my
There's just so many things that we can't cover in a
No.
podcast. I love the fact that this show doesn't drop characters out. Like in another show, Irving would have been gone after this episode, and so would Miss Cobell. But they're still around. And uh, we know that they're coming back. So I
And they're
appreciate that.
adding more. They're adding more characters
Yeah,
because we're getting John Noble, we're getting Robbie Benson. It's just crazy.
yeah, and so that they're adding a lot of characters. And I love the fact that Bert and Irving are still continuing their relationship. Like I didn't think Christopher Walken was coming back, so that's great. And I just like that they're treating the show and the characters with respect and the audience as well so far. And I really appreciate that. Even that small scene with Devin and Rickon, because Rickon calls the book a Trojan's horse,
Yeah.
which was interesting because I've never heard Trojan with apostrophe possessive S before. Does that mean? It's just related to that book, and Rickon trying to create some sort of rebellion, maybe down the road, who knows? But it also could be you could apply that to almost any of the severed characters, and maybe even some of the non-severed characters.
There's implications that the design people put something into the tools because they were nervous. That's one of the things speculated on. So there's a lot of implications for that title.
Yeah, and I think the episode title also is applicable to the episode itself because I have way more notes on this episode than I did Woe's Hollow. And I thought Woe's Hollow was a pretty dense episode too. But this episode, there's a lot of stuff happening under the surface here that we have to pay attention to because there's just so much of it. When Marks gets back to his workstation and he's flipping through all those files, I didn't write down every file name because I just didn't feel like it. But if I was really motivated, I could have wrote those all down and tried to see if there was any meaning to them. But I think one was like Circe or something like that, maybe, or something like that. But I don't know. The show just sets up that you can get as much out of it as you want to put into it, which is pretty cool. So with that, I'll just go around the table one more time for last thoughts. If there's anything that didn't come up that you guys wanted to mention, this is your chance to do it.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point because as we're sitting here talking, enjoying the conversation, I'm like, wow, and we haven't got to this or this. And it's a very dense episode, and it didn't feel, it just felt really well. And,
Hmm.
and I think you could spend time just breaking down, as you said, Rick and Devin, that
Hmm.
whole conversation. And now I've talked about many times, I do not understand what she sees in him.
Yeah.
I don't get this at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this. And I'm going to take just a minute. Brian, you're welcome back anytime. I hope you want to join us the rest of the season because I really have enjoyed your insight and don't want to put pressure on you, but this was a lot of fun and I hope you had a good time.
Definitely. I really appreciate it bringing me into the fold.
We'd
It's
love that.
Yeah.
great.
For sure.
That's some good insight.
Yeah. Karen, anything you want to add?
No, I've said plenty already. Sorry.
Is there anything that you wanted to mention?
I think we covered it. I guess the last thing I'd say is it still tickles me that they have phone booths in this world.
Yeah, exactly. For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, there's that weird mixture of new and old technology, right? Because that last episode, Woes Hollow, like the stuff that they were doing there, wow, they've got some really advanced technology. And then this one, you're coming, like even the bereavement, the funeral scene, like they're using a dot matrix printer to print the
Yep.
banner, and I'm just like, it's just so weird. So they're
No,
really keeping us off balance.
when I do discussions with my another Geek Quorum, which is my podcast about some of the Star Wars stuff, we always appreciate how like Star Wars has all these things that are fantastic, and they have lasers and they have hyperdrive and they have all this. But when you get down to it and you sit at a terminal, it's just so aesthetic retro.
Yeah, I do like, I don't know if it was you, Karen, but I do like the idea that Irving is calling Miss Cobell. That
Yeah, talking to.
that really rings true for me because if it's he's talking to somebody else and this is another whole new party, and I think the show has to be a little bit careful with bringing in too many new things all at once. So I hope that's who Irving is talking to. But I'm dying to see that dinner scene between Irving
Oh my
and
goodness.
Bert and Fields. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Can't wait.
If they got John Noble to play him, wow,
Yep.
that's going to be fantastic.
Imagine those three actors together.
Yeah, that's
What a
unbelievable.
stellar group of
Yeah,
men.
sure.
Yeah. I hope we get that dinner party.
Yes, for
You
sure.
know,
They
I
don't
just
bring
love
things
that.
up.
Yeah, so maybe there's a happy marriage there, the three guys together.
Maybe.
Some
Yep. Well,
polyamory going on.
with
Yeah.
their ham and expensive red wine.
Yes.
Yep. Expensive wine too.
Hey, get us something expensive. Don't buy a
Yep.
cheap.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so that's our show for this week, folks. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. Jesse, if people want to reach out and touch you, where would they do that?
Hello?
Well, I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter and Blue Sky and all the other stuff. You can hear me talking Bruce Springsteen and music on Set Listing Bruce and John Hyatt, Perfectly Good Podcast. And we are, just to give you a little behind the scenes, we usually record 2 episodes every Sunday morning. And last week we said, let's just take a break. We'll just do one episode. Good thing we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And please send us feedback. We haven't gotten any emails from anyone about this. And if you're watching this show, please send us some thoughts.
YouTube's
Yeah. Yeah. We
Yep.
would love that.
Yep. Karen.
So building off of that, if you do want to send us some feedback email wise, you can reach us at jklmediapodcast@gmail.com. I am at Eleveria on the various social medias, Aleveria. I am in the process of hopefully getting a TikTok channel for us off the ground with little clips from the episode. And then we're also JKL Media Podcast on YouTube.
Okay, Brian.
Well, you can reach me at the email address for my kind of dormant podcast forum. So that's gquorum@gmail.com.
Yeah. Want to do that one more time?
At gmail.com. So gquorum@gmail. The website in a shambly state, but the email still works.
Okay. Very cool. And of course, you can find me on YouTube at Lose Reviews, where we've just finished our Babylon 5 watch. We went through the whole series and finished off with the 2023 animated movie, The Road Home. So check that out. And I also have my writers' interviews that I do there, as well as my Stephen King podcast. And on Twitter, you can find me at Lou W. Sitzma and the same at Blue Sky, and that's SYTSMA, because I know most people want to spell it SYSTMA, but it's not. We bid you all adieu until next week, and we get the very weirdly Buddha named episode that refers to different states of death. So that should be interesting. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
And scene.
The proceeding has been a JKL Media production.